The very last sound I ever expected to hear in the sterile, quiet hospital room, right after the heart monitor flatlined and my mother took her final gentle breath, was the sound of my own father's voice, ripping through the silence not with grief, but with a rage that felt ancient and venomous. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face a twisted mask I didn't recognize, and screamed, "Get out! Get out of here right now! You are not my daughter!" Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Lily. I'm 75 years old now, and I live in a quiet little town in Ohio, surrounded by my books and my memories. But for more than 50 years, one of those memories has been locked away, a poisoned secret I thought I would take to my own grave. The memory of that day, of those words, has been a ghost in my house, a shadow that falls over every happy occasion, a constant, dull ache deep in my soul. I've never told anyone the full story of what happened. Not my dearest friends, not the man I later married, not even my own children. How could I? How do you explain that the man who was supposed to be your protector, your hero, turned into a monster in the very moment you needed him most? Telling this story feels like reopening a wound that never truly healed. It's a heavy story, a long story. It's the story of how a seemingly perfect family can be a carefully constructed lie, and how the deepest betrayals often come from the ones we are born to trust. I'm sharing this now because, at my age, you realize that secrets don't protect you. They imprison you. And I hope, I truly do, that my story might help someone else who feels trapped in a silence they didn't create. So before I begin, I have to ask for your support. Please give this video a like and subscribe to Grandmother's Soliloquy if you haven't already. Your kindness gives me the strength to revisit these dark places. Grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, because this is a journey back in time, and it's one I can no longer make alone. My story, the real story, didn't begin in that cold, heartless hospital room. It all began long before that terrible day, in a world that felt like it was painted in sunshine and warmth. It began in a small 2-story house with blue shutters and a porch swing where my mother used to hum lullabies. To understand the darkness that came later, you have to understand the light that came before it. You have to understand the home my father destroyed. Life before the storm was, for all intents and purposes, perfect. Or at least, that's how it felt to a little girl. My childhood was a tapestry woven with the brightest threads. I remember the smell of my mother's baking, apple pies cooling on the windowsill, their sweet cinnamon scent filling every corner of our home. I remember the feel of the thick, green grass between my toes as my father chased me around the backyard, his deep, booming laughter echoing off the oak trees. We were, in the eyes of the world and in my own heart, the perfect family. A strong, hard-working father, a gentle, loving mother, and a daughter who was the center of their universe. My mother, Eleanor, was the sun. She wasn't just the heart of our home, she was its soul. She had this incredible ability to make everything beautiful. She would arrange wildflowers in jam jars, and they'd look like a bouquet from a king's garden. She could take scraps of fabric and sew me the most wonderful dresses for my dolls. Her hands were rarely still, always kneading dough, tending to her roses, or stroking my hair as she read to me. She had a voice like honey, soft and soothing, and when she sang, it felt like the whole world went quiet just to listen. Her love was a physical thing, a warm blanket that wrapped around me, making me feel safe and cherished beyond measure. I remember one summer afternoon, I found a baby sparrow that had fallen from its nest. Its wing was bent at a funny angle, and I was crying, sure it was going to die. My mother gently scooped it into her hands, her touch so delicate. For a week, she kept it in a shoebox lined with cotton, feeding it sugar water from an eyedropper. She would whisper to it, telling it to be strong. And it worked. One morning, she took me outside, opened the box, and the little bird, healed and whole, flew away. That was my mother. She had a gift for mending broken things. And my father, Richard, he was my hero. To me, he was a giant, a man who could fix anything and do anything. He worked at the local mill, a hard job with long hours, but he never seemed tired when he was with us. He was the one who taught me how to ride a bicycle, holding onto the seat and running behind me for hours until I finally found my balance. His pride in me was a tangible thing. When I brought home a good report card, he would lift me onto his shoulders and parade me around the living room, calling me his little genius. He built me a treehouse in the big maple in our backyard, complete with a rope ladder and a little window. It was my castle, and he was the king who had built it for his princess. He loved my mother with a fierce, protective passion. I would watch them in the kitchen, dancing to the radio while they washed dishes, or see him sneak a flower from her garden to tuck behind her ear. His love seemed as solid and dependable as the ground beneath my feet. It was the foundation of my world. Our life was built on these small, happy rituals. Sunday drives after church, with the windows down and the radio playing. Picnics by the lake in the summer, my father teaching me how to skip stones across the water. In the autumn, we'd rake all the leaves into a giant pile just so I could jump in it. And Christmases, they were magical. The whole house smelled of pine and roasting turkey, and my father would always get a tree that was just a little too big for the living room. It all felt so safe, so permanent. Was any of it real? Or was I just a child, seeing only the surface of a life that had deep, dark cracks running beneath it all? Looking back now, with the wisdom of age and the curse of hindsight, I can see the first tiny fissure appear. It was so small, so insignificant at the time, that it was easy to dismiss. But it was there, a shadow of the man my father would become. I was about 10 years old, and my school was putting on its annual talent show. My mother had spent weeks helping me practice a piano piece, a simple sonatina by Clementi. She was endlessly patient, her fingers guiding mine on the keys, humming the melody when I got stuck. I was so excited. My father had promised all the men at the mill that his daughter was a prodigy, that I would be the star of the show. The pressure felt enormous, but I wanted to make him proud more than anything. The night of the show, the auditorium was packed. I could see my parents in the third row. My mother gave me a reassuring smile and a little wave. My father sat straight and tall, his arms crossed, not smiling. He had an intense look on his face, the same look he had when he was watching a baseball game in its final innings. When my name was called, my heart started hammering against my ribs. I walked onto the stage, my new dress swishing around my knees, and sat at the grand piano. The spotlight was hot on my face. I took a deep breath and began to play. The first page went perfectly. I could feel the music flowing through me, just like it did at home. But then, as I turned to the second page, my mind went completely blank, utterly, terrifyingly empty. I stared at the notes, but they looked like meaningless black dots on the page. My fingers froze over the keys. A nervous titter went through the audience. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, and a hot, prickly shame washed over my entire body. I looked out at my parents. My mother's face was filled with gentle encouragement. She was mouthing the words, "It's okay, honey, just breathe." But then I saw my father. He wasn't looking at me with sympathy. His jaw was clenched, and his eyes were cold. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something worse. It was a deep, cutting disappointment. It was embarrassment. In that moment, I felt like I hadn't just failed myself, I had failed him. I had publicly shamed him. The silence in the auditorium felt deafening. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled through the rest of the piece, my fingers fumbling, hitting wrong notes. I ran off the stage as soon as I finished, my face burning with tears. Later, in the car on the way home, a heavy silence filled the space. My mother tried to fill it, of course. "Oh, Lilybug," she said, her voice soft as velvet. "Don't you worry about a thing. Stage fright happens to the best of us. I am so proud of you for getting up there and being so brave." She reached back to squeeze my hand. I waited for my father to say something. Anything. To tell me it was okay, that he still loved me. But he just stared straight ahead at the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He didn't say a single word. Not then, and not when we got home. He just went into the living room, turned on the television, and acted as if the entire evening had never happened. His silence was louder than any scolding could have been. It was a cold, hard wall, and it was the first time I realized his pride was more important than my feelings. It was the first time I felt that his love might be conditional. That night, lying in my bed, I cried not because I had forgotten the music, but because for the first time in my life, I had felt truly alone in my father's presence. It was just a crack, a tiny hairline fracture in the foundation of our perfect family. But over the years, that crack would splinter and spread, until the whole house came crashing down. That cold, silent car ride home from the talent show was more than just an end to a bad evening. It was the beginning of a new climate in our home. A permanent chill had set in, and I, a 10-year-old girl, became its unwitting meteorologist, constantly checking the emotional atmosphere, trying to predict the weather of my father's moods. He didn't speak to me for 3 days. 3 whole days. In a house as small as ours, that kind of silence is a living entity. It sits at the dinner table with you. It follows you down the hallway. He would look right through me, his gaze sliding past, as if I were a piece of furniture he had no use for. My mother, my dear, gentle mother, tried her best to build a bridge across the chasm he had created. "Talk to her, Richard." I'd hear her whisper to him late at night, her voice pleading. "She's just a child. You're breaking her heart." I never heard his replies, only the low, dismissive rumble of his voice. On the 4th day, he finally spoke to me. I was setting the table for dinner, and he walked into the kitchen. My heart leaped, hoping for a hug, for an "it's okay." Instead, he stopped, looked at the fork I had just placed, and said, his voice flat and cold, "The fork goes on the left." That was it. The punishment was over, but forgiveness was never given. The message was clear. My failure had been noted, filed away, and would now be a part of my permanent record. From that day forward, something inside me shifted. The carefree joy of my childhood was replaced by a constant, humming anxiety. The singular goal of my existence became earning back my father's approval, to prove to him that I was not a disappointment. I became the perfect daughter. Or rather, I tried to be. My grades, which had always been good, became pristine. I would study for hours, not for the love of learning, but for the fear of seeing that cold look in his eyes if I brought home a B. I joined the debate club, not because I was passionate about it, but because it was a respectable extracurricular activity. I quit drawing in my sketchbook so much because he once glanced at it and muttered, "A frivolous waste of time." My teenage years were a masterclass in walking on eggshells. The house that once echoed with laughter now felt like a library, with me as a terrified patron and him as the stern librarian, ready to shush any sign of imperfection. He developed a hawk's eye for my flaws. My posture was a frequent topic of discussion. "Stand up straight, Lily. A young lady doesn't slouch. What will people think?" My clothes were another battleground. If I wore a skirt he deemed too short, I'd be met with a disapproving sniff. "Are you really going out in that? You look cheap." If I chose something more modest, he'd comment, "You look dowdy. Don't you have any pride in your appearance?" There was no winning. The goalposts were always moving, and the only constant was my failure to meet his expectations. My social life was put under a microscope. When I started to make friends, he would subject me to interrogations that felt more like a background check for a government job. "Who is this Sarah? What does her father do for a living? Where do they live?" He wasn't interested in whether she was kind or funny. He was interested in her family's social standing. He saw my friendships not as a source of joy for me, but as a reflection on him. One evening, a boy from my class named Tom, a sweet, shy boy whose father was a mechanic, called the house to ask me about homework. My father answered. I heard his voice turn to ice. "She's busy," he said, and hung up the phone. When I asked him why, he turned to me, his face grim. "I don't want you associating with boys like that. You can do better." The implication was crushing. I wasn't a person. I was a project. A stock he was trying to raise the value of. The few times I did excel in a way that pleased him, the praise was fleeting and always came with a warning. When I won the county spelling bee, he actually smiled. He clapped me on the back, and for a glorious afternoon, he was the old dad again, the hero. He called his brother to brag. But later that evening, as the glow of victory faded, he cornered me. "That was good," he said, his voice low. "Don't get cocky. The regional competition will be much harder. Don't embarrass me." The joy I had felt curdled in my stomach. It was never about me. It was always about him. My mother saw it all, of course. She was my constant defender, my soft place to land. She would come into my room after one of my father's critiques and hug me tight. "Don't you mind him, Lilybug," she'd whisper, stroking my hair. "He just wants the best for you. He just doesn't know how to show it." She made excuses for him, always. I think, in her heart, she was just as afraid of him as I was. The tension began to wear on her too. I started hearing them argue, their voices muffled through the bedroom wall. Her soft pleas and his sharp, cutting replies. He accused her of being too soft, of coddling me, of undermining his efforts to make me a success. He was isolating her, just as he was isolating me. Our little alliance of two was the only warmth left in the house, and he seemed determined to extinguish it. The final, decisive battle of my youth was fought over my future. For as long as I could remember, I had wanted to be a writer. I filled secret notebooks with stories and poems. It was the one place where I felt free, where his critical voice couldn't reach me. My dream was to go to a small liberal arts college out of state and study literature. It was a modest dream, but it was mine. When I finally got the courage to tell them, my mother's face lit up. "Oh, Lily, that's wonderful. You're such a gifted writer." My father, who was reading the newspaper, slowly lowered it. He looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, his expression unreadable. "A writer?" he said, the word dripping with disdain. "What kind of a living is that? You want to starve in an attic somewhere? Is that the grand plan?" "It's what I love, Dad," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Love doesn't pay the bills," he snapped. "I've worked my fingers to the bone to give you a good life, to give you opportunities. I will not have you throw it all away on some childish fantasy." "Richard, please," my mother interjected, her voice trembling slightly. "Let's just talk about it." "There's nothing to talk about," he boomed, throwing the newspaper onto the coffee table. "She will go to the state university, and she will study business. It's practical. It's respectable. She will have a career that we can be proud of. This is not a discussion. It is final." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see my father. I saw a stranger, a tyrant who believed his daughter's life was his property to be managed. The fight went on for weeks. It was a cold war of bitter silences, slammed doors, and tense, miserable dinners. I would plead my case, and he would dismiss it with a wave of his hand. My mother tried to reason with him, but he would shut her down with a cruel remark, accusing her of filling my head with nonsense. The house became a prison. In the end, I broke. The constant pressure, the emotional warfare, it was too much. To restore some semblance of peace, to stop the fighting that was clearly hurting my mother, I gave up. "Okay," I said one night at dinner, my voice dead. "I'll go to state. I'll study business." "Nine." My father nodded once, a smug, satisfied look on his face. He had won. He didn't say, "Thank you." He didn't acknowledge the sacrifice I had just made. He just picked up his fork and started eating, as if we'd been discussing the weather. My mother looked at me, her eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it mirrored my own. In that moment, something inside me died. The girl with dreams of stories and poems was gone, and in her place was a hollowed-out shell, an obedient daughter who had learned her lesson. My life was not my own. And then, just as I was starting my second year of college, my mother got sick. It began subtly. She was more tired than usual. She'd get headaches that would force her to lie down in a darkened room. At first, my father was dismissive. "She's just overdoing it," he'd say with an impatient sigh if I expressed concern. "She needs to learn to relax." He treated her illness as an inconvenience, another form of imperfection, That annoyed him. When she started losing weight, he actually commented, "Well, at least you'll fit into your old dresses again," as if it were a positive development. He refused to see what was right in front of him. A perfect life doesn't have room for sickness. But the illness wouldn't be ignored. One morning, she couldn't get out of bed. The pain in her abdomen was so severe that I had to call an ambulance. I rode with her to the hospital, holding her frail hand, her skin feeling like paper. My father followed in his car, his face a mask of irritation, as if this were all a dramatic display she was putting on to get attention. The diagnosis came a few days later. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The words hung in the air of the small, sterile consultation room, heavy and lethal. The doctor gave her 6 months, maybe less. My world didn't just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I looked at my mother, saw the terror and acceptance warring in her beautiful, tired eyes. Then I looked at my father. I expected to see grief. I expected to see fear or love, or at least a shred of compassion for the woman he had vowed to cherish in sickness and in health. Instead, I saw a flicker of something else in his eyes. Fury. He was angry. He was angry at the cancer, at the doctors, at the universe, and most of all, it seemed, he was angry at my mother for daring to be so imperfect as to die. The journey home from the hospital was the quietest I have ever known. It was a silence filled not with peace, but with unspoken horrors. When we got inside the house, my father turned not to my mother, but to me. "Well," he said, his voice brittle, "you'll have to take a semester off from school. Your mother will need looking after." It wasn't a request. It was an order. And so began the longest, most harrowing 6 months of my life. Our home transformed from a tense library into a grim hospital ward. I became my mother's full-time nurse, and my father became the resentful warden. I did everything. I learned to administer her medication, a complex cocktail of pills that had to be given on a strict schedule. I cooked her meals, trying to tempt her failing appetite with her old favorites. I bathed her. I helped her to the bathroom. I read to her for hours when the pain kept her awake. I did it all out of a desperate, bottomless love for her. Every moment I had left with her was precious, a stolen jewel. My father, on the other hand, retreated. He couldn't stand the sight of her weakness. The physical realities of her illness, the vomiting, the fatigue, the slow, cruel wasting away of her body repulsed him. He treated it like a personal affront. He would come home from work, stand in the doorway of her bedroom for a moment, and ask, "How are you feeling, Eleanor?" without any real warmth, and then he would retreat to the living room and turn the television volume up loud, drowning out the sounds of sickness from the other room. His frustration and anger needed a target, and that target became me. Nothing I did was ever right. He became a relentless critic of my caregiving. If the house wasn't spotless, he would accuse me of letting things go. "This place is a sty, Lily. What do you do all day? Your mother is sick. The least you can do is keep the house in order." He'd bellow, ignoring the fact that I'd been up all night with her. If I seemed tired, he would sneer. "You think you're tired? Try working at the mill for 10 hours. He complained about the cost of her medication. He complained about the smell of sickness in the house. He complained that her illness was making him a social pariah. "I had to cancel the Rotary Club dinner again," he lamented one night. "What am I supposed to tell people? That my wife is—" He couldn't even say the word, dying. The dialogues between us were short, brutal, and always left me feeling smaller, more worthless. "Dad, Mom's fever is up again. I think we need to call Dr. Evans." "The doctor can't do anything. You're being hysterical. Just give her the pills." Or, "I managed to get Mom to eat a little soup today." "A little? That's all? You need to try harder. She'll waste away to nothing if you don't get some food into her." My inner world was a storm of conflicting emotions. There was the profound, soul-deep grief of watching my beloved mother fade away day by day. It was a slow, agonizing torture. And braided with that grief was a constant, simmering fear of my father. The love I once had for him had long since curdled into a confusing mixture of duty, resentment, and terror. I felt utterly and completely alone, trapped in that house of sorrow and anger. I would sit by my mother's bed, holding her hand, and she would look at me with such love and sadness. She knew. She saw what he was doing. "I'm so sorry, my sweet girl," she whispered to me one afternoon, her voice as thin as a thread. "This isn't what I wanted for you." Tears streamed down my face. "Don't be sorry, Mama. I want to be here. I love you." "He's hard," she breathed, the effort costing her. "He's just afraid." Even then, even as she was dying, she was still making excuses for him. But I couldn't see it that way anymore. I wasn't seeing a scared man. I was seeing a cruel one. A selfish, hollow man whose entire identity was built on a foundation of pride, a foundation that was now crumbling, and he was making sure we all crumbled with it. The man I had once called my hero was now my tormentor, and his greatest cruelty was yet to come. It was waiting for me in that final sterile room, in the moment my mother's heart finally stopped, and all of his rage at the universe finally found its true, intended target, me. The end came on a Tuesday. The sky outside the hospital window was a flat, unforgiving gray, the color of resignation. The world outside kept moving, cars rushing, people heading to work, oblivious to the fact that my entire universe was shrinking down to the space of this sterile room, to the sound of a machine that was slowly, reluctantly admitting defeat. I had been sitting by my mother's side for 36 hours straight, holding her hand. It felt impossibly fragile, like a small, sleeping bird cupped in my own. Her breaths were shallow, little sips of air, spaced further and further apart. I whispered to her, telling her stories from my childhood, reminding her of the scent of her roses in June, of the time we had laughed so hard we cried while baking a lopsided birthday cake. I told her I loved her, over and over, a mantra against the coming silence. I told her it was okay to go, that I would be all right, a lie that felt both kind and cruel. My father was in the room, but he wasn't with us. He stood by that gray window, his back to the bed, a rigid silhouette against the dreary light. He hadn't touched her. He hadn't spoken a word in hours. He was like a man waiting for a train, impatient and angry at its delay, refusing to look at the track. He was waiting for the inconvenience of his wife's death to be over. The beeping of the heart monitor, which had been the frantic soundtrack to our lives for weeks, grew slower, more erratic. Beep, 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 and then one final soft exhale from my mother, a sigh of release. The monitor let out one long, unbroken, piercing tone. It was over. A wave of something I couldn't even name washed over me. It was grief, yes, a sorrow so vast it felt like drowning. But there was also a profound sense of peace. For her, her suffering was finally done. The pain was gone. She was free. I bent over and kissed her forehead, which was already beginning to cool. "She's at peace now, Dad," I whispered into the ringing silence, my voice thick with tears. It was those words, I think, that finally broke him. My simple acknowledgement of the end, of the reality he had been fighting against, was a match to his fuse. He spun around from the window, and his face was something I will see in my nightmares until the day I die. It was not the face of a grieving husband. It was the face of pure, undiluted rage. His skin was blotchy and red, his eyes were wild, and his mouth was twisted into a snarl. "Peace," he roared, and the sound was so violent it felt like a physical blow. It ripped through the sacred silence of the room. "What do you know about peace?" He strode towards the bed, not to her, but to me. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at my face. "She gave up. You let her give up. With all your soft talk and your hand-holding." I recoiled, pulling back from my mother's side as if I'd been burned. I was frozen, my blood turning to ice in my veins. This couldn't be real. Not now. Not here. "You!" he spat, his voice shaking with a fury that seemed to come from the very center of the earth. "You were always a drain on her. A disappointment. From the day you were born, All you ever did was take. You took her energy. You took her time. You took her dreams. Every word was a stone, and he was determined to stone me to death with them. He was rewriting our entire history, painting me as the villain in a story where I had only ever been a loving daughter. And then came the words I had already told you, the words that cleaved my life in two. He leaned in close, his breath hot and sour. "Get out," he seethed, his voice low and venomous now. "Get out of here right now. I don't want to look at you. You are not my daughter." Amen. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it vaporized. The part of me that had spent a lifetime craving his approval. The part that had twisted itself into knots to please him. The part that still, foolishly, held out hope for the father he used to be. It all vanished. It was burned to ash by the heat of his hatred. A nurse, hearing the shouting, rushed in. Her face was a blur of shock and concern. My father, seeing her, let out a sound of disgust, turned on his heel, and stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with the nurse and my mother's silent body. I stood there, trembling, the echo of his words ringing in my ears. I looked from the empty doorway he had just disappeared through, to the peaceful face of my mother on the pillow. Her expression was serene. All the lines of pain and worry were gone. And looking at her, a strange and terrible clarity washed over me. A cold, hard calm settled deep in my bones, extinguishing the fire of my own shock and pain. He was right. I wasn't his daughter. Not anymore. A daughter of his would have crumpled. She would have sobbed and begged for forgiveness for a crime she didn't commit. A daughter of his would have accepted the blame, just as she had accepted it her whole life. But that girl, the girl who lived on his conditional love, had just died. She died right alongside her mother. My mother had spent her life making excuses for this man's cruelty, absorbing his pride, and protecting me from the worst of it. She was gone now, and so was my obligation to endure him. The awakening was not a gentle dawn. It was a lightning strike, and in its flash I saw the path forward. My grief for my mother was pure and bottomless, but my relationship with my father was a disease, and it was time to amputate. The days that followed were a surreal haze. My father, in a stunning act of hypocrisy, played the role of the devastated, grieving widower to perfection. He received visitors with a somber face, accepted their casseroles and their condolences with weary sighs. He spoke of my mother in hushed, reverent tones, calling her his angel Tor. Watching him perform was like watching a snake shed its skin. The violent, hateful creature from the hospital room was gone, replaced by this pillar of quiet suffering. No one else saw it. To the world, he was a man to be pitied. To me, he was a monster. And his performance only hardened my resolve. The day of the funeral was cold and gray, a perfect reflection of my heart. I sat in the front pew, a statue in a black dress, listening to the minister talk about a perfect marriage and a devoted husband. Every word felt like a lie. I didn't cry. My tears had frozen solid inside me. After the burial, our house filled with well-meaning people. They patted my shoulder, telling me to be strong for my father, that he would need me now, more than ever. The irony was a bitter pill in my throat. While my father was downstairs, accepting sympathies and playing the tragic hero, I went upstairs. I walked not into my own room, but into my parents'. I moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose. I opened my mother's jewelry box. I took her wedding ring, which my father had callously left on the dresser, and the simple gold locket she always wore, the one with a tiny picture of me as a baby inside. I packed a small bag with only the most essential things, the locket, a few changes of clothes, all the money I had saved from my part-time college job, and the secret notebooks filled with the stories he had called a waste of time. These were the pieces of my real life, the life he had tried to extinguish. My final act was the most important. I am a writer. He had tried to take that from me, but my words were the one thing he could never truly control. And so, I would use them one last time. Not to plead, not to rage, but to pronounce a sentence. I took a single sheet of my mother's beautiful stationery, the kind with pale blue hydrangeas on it, and I wrote him a letter. My hand did not shake. My thoughts were crystal clear. It was very short. You told me in the hospital that I am not your daughter. After a lifetime of trying to be the person you wanted, I have decided to accept your words as the only truth you have ever spoken to me. You will not look for me. You will not contact me. You will not ask about me. As far as the world knows, you are a grieving widower who lost his wife and whose heartbroken daughter simply had to get away. You love appearances. This one you can keep. My mother is at peace now, and so am I. Goodbye. I didn't sign my name. I folded the single sheet of paper, walked into his bedroom, and placed it squarely in the center of his pillow. The pillow next to the empty space where my mother would never lie again. It was a final, silent statement. Then I walked downstairs. The house was humming with low voices. I slipped through the crowd of mourners, a ghost in my own home. No one tried to stop me. They saw a pale, grieving girl and assumed I was going out for some air. I didn't look at my father. I didn't need to. I walked out the front door, down the porch steps, and I did not look back. I walked the 2 miles to the bus station, my small bag over my shoulder, the locket cold against my skin. As I bought a one-way ticket to a city I had only ever seen on a map, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't happiness. Not yet. It was something far more potent. It was freedom. The fight was over. The fight back had just begun. The bus ticket I bought that day took me to Chicago. A city so vast and anonymous, it felt like the perfect place to disappear and be reborn. For the first few years, survival was my only goal. I found a small room in a boarding house and a job as a waitress in a 24-hour diner. The work was hard. The hours were long, but every dollar I earned felt like a medal. It was mine. The exhaustion in my bones was an honest exhaustion, earned by my own labor, not by the soul-crushing effort of trying to please an impossible man. In the quiet moments, in the dead of night, between serving coffee to weary travelers, I would take out my secret notebooks. And I would write. I wrote about my mother. I wrote about her garden, her songs, her gentleness. I wrote to keep her alive inside me. I never wrote about him. He didn't deserve the ink. I never went back to business school. Instead, I took night classes at a community college, studying literature and creative writing. I found my people there, other dreamers, other storytellers. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't see my passion as a frivolous waste of time, but as a gift. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to build a life that was small and simple, but it was authentically mine. I met a kind man, a history professor who loved my stories and the quiet strength he said he saw in my eyes. We married, had 2 children, and built a home that was filled not with tense silence, but with loud laughter, spirited debates, and unconditional love. The very things my father had despised. For decades, I had no contact with him. I kept my promise. I vanished from his life as completely as if I had never existed. I never knew if he tried to find me. I never asked. But the past has a way of finding you, even when you aren't looking for it. About 15 years ago, I received a letter. It was from Sarah, my childhood friend, the one whose father he had looked down upon. She had tracked me down through a writers' guild I belonged to. Her letter was full of news about her own life, but it was the last paragraph that made my hands tremble. She wrote that she had seen my father. She had been back in our old hometown visiting her parents and had seen him at the grocery store. He was an old man, she said. Not just old in years, but old in spirit. He looked frail and lost, wandering the aisles with a near-empty cart. The house, she said, was a local curiosity. He had kept it perfectly preserved, like a museum. The lawn was always mowed, the shutters always painted, but no one ever went in, and he rarely came out. He lived alone in that perfect house, a prisoner in the monument he had built to his own pride. Sarah wrote that she had tried to say hello, to ask about me, but he had just looked at her with vacant eyes, mumbled something, and shuffled away. He had gotten exactly what he wanted, a life free from the daughter who had disappointed him. And in the end, it was a life of profound, crushing loneliness. He died a few years after that, alone in that house. A neighbor found him. He had left everything, the house, the money, to a distant cousin he hadn't seen in 30 years. My name was nowhere in the will. It was the final confirmation. I truly was not his daughter. And reading that, I did not feel anger or sadness. I felt only a quiet, final release. His punishment wasn't one I had to inflict. It was one he chose for himself. Every single day, he woke up in that empty, silent house. So what is the lesson in all of this? What did I learn from this half a lifetime of pain? It's not as simple as stand up to bullies. It's deeper than that. The most important lesson I learned is that not all love is a safe harbor. Sometimes, the love you are taught to crave is actually a cage, gilded and decorated to look like a throne. I spent 20 years of my life believing my worth was something that had to be earned from him, that his approval was the sun, and I was just a planet who needed its light to exist. But his love was never a sunbeam, it was a spotlight, and I was expected to perform in it flawlessly forever. When I walked away, I didn't just walk away from a man. I walked away from the idea that I needed anyone else's permission to be myself. My life didn't begin at birth. My real life began at the bus station. It began with a one-way ticket and a silent promise to myself to honor the woman my mother always knew I was. The pain of my past is a part of me. It's a scar on my heart, and it always will be. But scars are not wounds. They are proof of healing. They are a reminder that I survived something that was meant to destroy me. And that brings me to you. I know that many of you watching this have your own version of my father. It might be a parent, a spouse, a boss, or a friend. Someone whose expectations feel like a heavy coat you can never take off. Someone who makes you feel that their love is conditional, that you have to constantly audition for a role in your own life. You may feel trapped, just as I did. You may feel that their voice is the only one that matters. Please, listen to me now. Hear me with your whole heart. Your worth is not a negotiation. It is your birthright. You do not exist on this earth to be a reflection of someone else's pride. Your dreams, your passions, your quirks, the very things that make you, are not frivolous wastes of time. They are the map to your own soul. You do not have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your bus station moment may not be as dramatic as mine. You don't have to run away to a new city, but you have to find it. It might be saying no to a demand that compromises your spirit. It might be signing up for that class you've always dreamed of. It might be as simple and as brave as looking in the mirror and saying, "My voice matters. My happiness matters." It is the moment you stop accepting the script someone else has written for you and you pick up the pen yourself. It is terrifying. But on the other side of that terror, I promise you, is freedom. The freedom to be imperfectly, gloriously, and completely yourself. Thank you for sitting with me through this. Sharing it has been heavy, but your presence here makes the burden lighter. If my story has touched you in any way, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to Grandmother's Soliloquy, and sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Your support helps these stories find the people who need them most. Remember to be kind to yourselves and to cherish the love that frees you, not the love that cages you. I'll see you in the next story. Love, Grandma Lily.